The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Council stared at the holographic message before him, his many eyes wide with disbelief. Humanity's response to their final offer was not a counterproposal, not even a demand for better terms. It was a single word. No. Silence gripped the council chamber. Treaties, decrees, and alliances had shaped the cosmos for millennia, binding every species under one law. No civilization had ever dared refuse. But humanity wasn't like the others. And now, fear spread like wildfire across the stars. The Galactic Council chamber was deathly silent. The Supreme Chancellor, Vorkun, tapped his clawed fingers against the polished obsidian table, his violet eyes scanning the gathered delegates. The air was thick with unease. He exhaled slowly before addressing the council. Humanity has rejected our treaties again, Vorkun announced, his voice steady but laced with barely concealed fury. Murmurs broke out. Ambassador Kalyth of the Zelnari hissed. Impossible. No species has ever survived without compliance. They must be bluffing. They are not, Vorkun said. The United Earth Directorate has issued their final response. We decline. Silence. Ambassador Dren of the Mizari clicked his mandibles. Then they choose war. They believe they are above us, said Ralthax of the Zaithran Dominion. They must be reminded of their place. Vorkun's gaze darkened. If we do not act now, their defiance will spread. Other species will question our authority. The Council's power will fracture. Ambassador Kravex of the Vulshoth leaned forward. We must send a message. A swift and decisive strike. Destroy one of their colonies. Show them the cost of refusal. No. Vorkun's voice cut through the noise. Earth itself. We erase their homeworld from existence. Their resistance dies in a single, glorious firestorm. A hush fell over the chamber. The weight of the decision pressed on every delegate, yet no one dared to oppose it. Mobilize the Grand Armada, Vorkun commanded. Humanity's time is over. Victor Kane leaned back in his chair, arms crossed as the War Council's holographic display flickered before him. The faces of Earth's highest-ranking officials looked grim. We've intercepted their transmission, Director Elias Rourke said, his voice a measured growl. The Galactic Council is bringing everything they've got. Kane exhaled sharply. So, they finally showed their hand. We estimate a fleet of over 10,000 warships, Admiral Wren added. Their objective is total planetary annihilation. A smirk played at the corner of Kane's lips. So much effort just to wipe out one stubborn little species. This is no time for jokes, Rourke snapped. They won't stop until we're dust. Then we don't give them the chance, Kane said, standing. His gaze was sharp, unwavering. We've been preparing for this moment. We knew they'd try to crush us. But they don't know what we're capable of. Victor, Brent said cautiously, we're outnumbered 100 to 1. That just makes it fair, Kane said. We don't need numbers. We need precision. He turned to Rourke. Authorize full deployment of Project Revenant. We hit them before they even reach firing range. Rourke hesitated. Project Revenant is exactly what we need, Kane interrupted. No half measures. No negotiations. No mercy. A long pause. Then Rourke nodded. You have command. Kane grinned. Let's give them something to fear. Vorkun sat at the helm of the Grand Armada, watching the holographic feed of their advance. Earth loomed ahead, the blue-green planet fragile against the black void. His lips curled in satisfaction. Admiral Selleck, he called. Prepare the primary bombardment fleet. At once, Supreme Chancellor. Selleck responded. An officer turned, concern flickering across his features. Sir, long-range scanners detect anomalies. Several unknown signals. Clarify. Not ships. Something else. Vorkun frowned. Deploy probes. The probes launched, streaking through space toward the strange distortions. A moment passed. Then static. Then nothing. And then, without warning, the void erupted. Explosions tore through the Armada's flanks. Battleships imploded in fire and debris before they even knew what hit them. "What is happening?" Selek bellowed. "Enemy forces emerging from cloaked positions," the officer shouted. "Multiple Dreadnought-class warships, human in origin." Vorkun's blood ran cold. "Impossible! Their fleet was supposed to be scattered." A new signal pinged across the battlefield, an open channel. Vorkun hesitated before accepting the transmission. The hologram crackled to life, revealing Victor Kane. "Nice fleet you got there," Kane said, a cocky grin on his face. "Shame if someone burned it to the ground." Vorkun's claws curled into fists. "You are outmatched, human! Surrender, and we will make your deaths swift." Kane chuckled. "Cute. But we both know that's not happening." His grin faded, replaced by something colder. "You see, we've been watching. Studying. You rely on numbers. On overwhelming force. On species that roll over the moment you growl." Kane leaned forward. "But we're not them." The battlefield erupted again. Human warships maneuvered like ghosts, blinking in and out of existence, their weapons cutting through the Armada's hulls like razors through flesh. Vorkun's throat tightened. How are they?" "Project Revenant," Kane said, as if reading his mind. "Autonomous AI warships. Self-repairing. Self-adapting. Your fleets? Just target practice." A sudden alarm blared across Vorkun's command deck. "Supreme Chancellor! We've lost over 40% of the Armada." His vision blurred. "Impossible." Kane's voice cut through the chaos. "Here's what's gonna happen, Vorkun. You're going to turn that fleet around, take your pathetic excuse for an empire, and run." His smirk returned, deadly and sharp. "Or we wipe you from existence." Vorkun trembled with rage. "We will never kneel to your kind." Kane's expression darkened. "Yeah. That's what the last guy said." On the feed, a Council flagship detonated in a white-hot fireball, vaporized by a single kinetic orbital strike. The shockwave rippled through the Armada. Panic spread. Council ships broke formation, commanders screaming contradictory orders. The Armada, once invincible, was fracturing before his eyes. "Sir, we must retreat," Selek pleaded. "We can't withstand this." "Retreat." The words tasted like bile. But Vorkun knew. They had lost. His hands curled into fists. "Order the withdrawal." The order was given. The Grand Armada, the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever known, turned and fled. Victor Kane leaned back in his chair, watching as the Council's once mighty forces vanished into the void, broken and humiliated. He exhaled a cloud of smoke, eyes gleaming. "That's right," he muttered. "Run." The silence on the command deck was deafening. The Grand Armada, once the symbol of the Galactic Council's iron grip, was in full retreat. Supreme Chancellor Vorkun stood frozen, his scaled hands gripping the edges of his command console, his mind struggling to process the unthinkable. Humanity had turned the tide. No, they hadn't just turned it. They had crushed it. His officers were frantic. The bridge was in chaos, alarms screaming, reports flooding in about fleet commanders going dark, Council warships being picked off one by one. The carefully structured war doctrine that had kept the Council in power for millennia meant nothing against these humans. "Supreme Chancellor, we have to." "Silence." The word was spoken softly, but the sheer weight of it cut through the noise like a blade. The command deck fell still, officers holding their breath, waiting for Vorkun's next words. "We underestimated them." His voice was raw with barely restrained fury. "Humanity was never an insignificant species. They have been planning this moment for years. This is no rebellion. This is a reckoning." No one dared respond. He straightened, inhaling deeply, pushing down the suffocating weight of humiliation. "Order all retreating ships to regroup at the nearest hypergate. The battle is lost, but the war is not over. Sir, several of our dreadnoughts have been cut off. Leave them." The officer hesitated. "Leave them." There was no room for weakness. The Council had lost battles before, but never a war. He would not allow humanity to be the first to destroy them. A new transmission flickered on the holodisplay. The human war hero, Victor Kane, sat in the cockpit of his warship, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Running so soon, Chancellor? I thought you wanted to teach us a lesson." Vorkun's claws scraped the console. "You dare mock us?" "Oh, I dare," Kane said smoothly, lighting a cigar. "After all, it's not every day you watch the so-called rulers of the galaxy tuck their tails and flee." The Chancellor's throat burned with the taste of failure. "Don't feel bad," Kane continued, exhaling smoke. "You were never going to win this fight. See, while you spent centuries making rules, building treaties, and playing politics, we were building weapons. While you sat around debating war, we were preparing for it." His grin sharpened. "And now you're seeing what happens when you threaten a species that doesn't take orders." Vorkun's fists clenched. "You are a plague on this galaxy. You call it a plague. We call it freedom." Kane leaned forward. "Here's the deal, Chancellor. You run, you survive. You come back, we burn your worlds to the ground. No treaties. No negotiations. Just war. The kind your kind isn't ready for." The Chancellor's chest tightened, rage and fear coiling together. He wanted to lash out, to command his forces to turn and fight, to erase these humans from existence. But that was no longer an option. "Not today. This isn't over," he said instead. Kane chuckled. "Oh, I hope not." The transmission cut. The ship trembled as another explosion rocked the fleet's remains. Vorkun turned to his officers, his voice cold as death. "Get us out of here." The command was obeyed without hesitation. Within moments, the surviving warships vanished into hyperspace. Kane watched them disappear, then took a long drag from his cigar. "See you soon, Chancellor." Behind him, the human fleet stood victorious, engines burning against the vast, empty void. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the galaxy, the fear of humanity had just begun to spread. The War Council chamber was bathed in dim red light, the holographic map of the galaxy pulsing before them. Earth's leaders stood around the massive display, eyes locked on the retreating remnants of the Galactic Council's once mighty armada. Silence hung thick in the air, broken only by the rhythmic tap of Victor Kane's gloved fingers against the table. "They're running," Admiral Wren muttered, voice tinged with disbelief. "The Council has never retreated before." Kane exhaled, arms crossed. "They've never fought us before." Director Elias Rourke leaned forward, his sharp gaze sweeping across the gathered officers. "This victory is significant, but it's not the end. The Council isn't just going to lick their wounds and disappear. They'll regroup, rebuild, and retaliate." Kane smirked. "Let them. I'll send them back in pieces." "We need to be smarter than that," Rourke said, eyes narrowing. "We need to be prepared for their next move." A general cleared his throat. "With respect, sir, we barely survived this battle. Their next assault could be even bigger." Kane scoffed. "We barely survived? That wasn't survival. That was a slaughter. They came in expecting a pushover. Instead, we humiliated them. We got lucky," another officer muttered. Kane's smirk vanished. His gaze locked onto the officer like a targeting reticle. "Lucky?" His voice was slow, deliberate. "Lucky didn't build Project Revenant. Lucky didn't hack their systems before they even knew we existed. Lucky didn't send their so-called Grand Armada screaming into the void." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a growl. "That wasn't luck. That was humanity refusing to kneel." Silence. The tension was thick enough to cut. Rourke finally spoke. "Regardless, they'll retaliate. And we need to decide our next move." Kane exhaled, shaking his head. "You're thinking too small." The room turned to him. "They're already afraid," he continued. "That's why they ran. Fear is more powerful than any weapon. If we let them regroup, that fear fades. But if we push now, if we choke them in their own halls, they won't recover. Ever." "You're proposing an offensive?" Wren asked. I'm proposing we end this war before it even starts. Rourke hesitated. You're suggesting a direct strike on the Council's homeworld. Exactly. Murmurs erupted. It was madness. It was unthinkable. It was insane. It was exactly what humanity needed to do. We don't have the resources for a prolonged campaign, an admiral argued. Kane's grin was razor-sharp. Who said anything about prolonged? Eyes widened. We don't conquer, Kane continued. We don't occupy. We don't even give them a chance to negotiate. He pointed at the hollow map, at the flashing red symbol marking the Council's capital. We hit them so fast, so hard, that they don't just surrender, they break. We make sure that when history looks back, this moment isn't called a war. His gaze swept the room. It's called an execution. Silence. Heavy. Daring anyone to challenge him. Rourke folded his hands. And what if we fail? Kane chuckled. Fail? I just made the Supreme Chancellor run for his life. You think he's going to be any braver when I'm standing in his throne room with a gun to his head? Rourke stared at the map, at the blinking capital planet. Then he nodded. Prepare the fleet. The Council's homeworld burned. It started with a single rupture in the sky, the violent crack of reality, as the first human warships tore through the veil of hyperspace, their massive hulls gleaming against the darkness. Within seconds, the void filled with fire, kinetic bombardments raining down on planetary defenses, reducing fortifications that had stood for centuries to smoldering ruins. The Galactic Council had never known true war. Inside the High Chamber, the Supreme Chancellor Vorkun stood amidst the chaos, his claws gripping the edges of the command console as the reports flooded in. Our orbital defenses are gone, Vorkun snapped, his voice shaking. He could see it with his own eyes, the skies above the capital city choked with fire as human dreadnoughts ripped through their defenses like they were made of paper. Deploy the Palace Guard! Someone screamed. The command was meaningless. Human forces had already landed. A distant explosion shook the ground, and for the first time in the Chancellor's long reign, he felt fear. The human soldiers were inside the council halls. The grand doors to the chamber burst open with an ear-splitting crack. Victor Kane walked in like he owned the place, flanked by armored soldiers, their rifles still smoking from the massacre in the hallways. His expression was calm, almost amused, as he stepped over the corpses of dead guards, boots clicking against the marble floor. Vorkun staggered back, breathing heavily. You dare! Kane's pistol was already aimed at his head. Chancellor, Kane said, voice almost casual, like he was greeting an old friend. Let's skip the part where you act surprised. Vorkun trembled, but he straightened, trying to summon the authority that had ruled 1,000 worlds. This is madness, he spat. You cannot win. Kane exhaled through his nose, tilting his head. You really don't get it, do you? He gestured toward the massive panoramic window that overlooked the capital city. Fires raged in every district. Skyscrapers crumbled like sand castles. The streets were filled with human war machines, unchallenged, unstoppable. Kane took a slow step forward, and Vorkun flinched. You already lost, Kane said. And you lost because you thought we were like you. The Chancellor's throat was dry. You thought we needed treaties. Kane's voice was sharp, edged with lethal amusement. You thought we needed alliances. You thought we needed your approval to exist. Kane leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. We don't. Vorkun's fists clenched. We are the Council. We have ruled this galaxy for millennia. Kane laughed. Not just a chuckle, a full, deep, genuine laugh. Oh, that's adorable, he said. You really thought that just because you've existed for a long time, you were untouchable. Vorkun's mind raced for options. We can negotiate. Kane smirked, then pressed the gun harder against the Chancellor's skull. No. Vorkun's heart slammed against his ribs. And no? Kane's smile vanished. Humanity doesn't negotiate with cowards, he said. We don't negotiate with tyrants. And we sure as hell don't negotiate with the losing side. A cold shiver ran down the Chancellor's spine. Listen! You listen! Kane cut him off. You started this war. You sent your fleets to burn Earth. You wanted us erased. He took another step, and Vorkun had nowhere left to run. But here we are. And here you are, begging for mercy. The Chancellor's breath came in ragged gasps. Kane's finger tightened on the trigger. A single shot. Vorkun's body collapsed to the floor, lifeless. The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Council was dead. Kane exhaled and holstered his pistol. That's a wrap. He turned to his men. Send the broadcast. Let the galaxies see what happens when you come after us. The soldiers nodded, activating their comms. Within minutes, every planet, every colony, every species under the Council's rule watched the transmission. The Chancellor's corpse. The flaming ruins of the Council homeworld. And the human fleet, undisputed rulers of the void. Kane stepped over the body, walking toward the exit, speaking into his calm. The war's over. A pause. We won. The galaxy held its breath. The Supreme Chancellor was dead, his body cooling on the polished floor of the High Chamber. The broadcast of his execution had spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of Council space. Leaders, rulers, warlords, and rebels alike watched in silence as the transmission looped, Victor Kane, standing over the corpse of the most powerful figure in the known universe. The Council was shattered. Victor Kane stood before the war room aboard his command ship, the Ragnarok, watching the flickering holographic map of the galaxy. The Council's once mighty empire was in free fall. Panic gripped every species that had once bowed under its rule. Some were already reaching out, scrambling to swear allegiance to the new order. Others were mobilizing for war. Kane leaned back in his chair, exhaling a slow breath. Status report. A fleet officer stepped forward. Most of their governors are cutting ties. A few still believe they can resist. Kane's smirk was sharp. They're welcome to try. Admiral Wren folded her arms. We should strike before they organize. They're afraid, but fear fades. If we don't capitalize now, we might be fighting another war in a few years. Kane tapped his fingers against the metal table. Nah. Not another war. Another massacre. The room went silent. Director Elias Rourke studied him carefully. You think they'll come to us? I know they will. Kane's grin was wolfish. They've spent their whole lives under someone's boot. They don't know how to survive without a leash around their necks. Silence hung heavy. Admiral Wren shifted uncomfortably. And if they don't come willingly? Kane's eyes darkened. Then we burn the rest. No one questioned him. A transmission request flashed across the holodisplay. A council governor. One of the first to beg. Kane activated the channel. The alien on the other side, some trembling, reptilian bureaucrat, was visibly shaking. Please, the governor stammered. We are prepared to recognize humanity's rule. We swear loyalty. Kane smiled. Of course you do. We only ask that we be allowed to keep governing our people. Kane tilted his head. And why would I let you do that? The governor hesitated. We can ensure stability. Kane's smile vanished. You were part of the system that let the Chancellor run unchecked. You let your people suffer under his rule. Why should I believe you'll do better under mine? The governor swallowed. I can. Kane leaned forward, voice like steel. You want to survive? Then here's how this works. You don't get to keep anything. Your power? Gone. Your title? Gone. Your loyalty to the old world? Burn it. His tone dropped, sharp as a blade. And if you ever try to play both sides. He reached out, pressing a button. A secondary screen flickered to life, showing a live feed of orbital bombardments raining down on another Council-loyal world. The governor paled. Your choice, Kane said. Loyalty. Or fire. A long, agonizing pause. The governor bowed. Kane smirked and cut the transmission. Rourke exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. You enjoy this too much. Kane stretched, cracking his knuckles. What's not to enjoy? We're cleaning up a mess. Ren studied the map. And what about the ones who won't bow? Kane's expression hardened. Then they get the Chancellor's treatment. The reality was simple. The old order was dead. The Council had ruled with an iron fist for centuries, treating every species, including humanity, as pawns in their vast political game. Now, humanity wasn't playing anymore. This wasn't conquest. This wasn't diplomacy. This was reconstruction. Kane rose to his feet. Deploy our fleets to the remaining holdouts. Give them a chance to surrender. His voice was calm, but final. If they refuse? His gaze swept across the room. Erase them. No one questioned it. The meeting adjourned. Officers hurried to execute their orders. The fleet would move at dawn. Kane walked alone toward the viewing deck, staring at the Council's homeworld below. A planet that once dictated the fate of billions, now nothing more than ashes and silence. Rourke's voice came from behind. And when the war is truly over? Kane didn't look away from the window. Then we build something better. Rourke sighed. And if we just become what we replaced? Kane smirked. That depends. His reflection stared back at him. Are we better? The stars held no answer. But humanity's reign had begun.